Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here with Troy tonight. How are you doing?
Hey, what's up, Perch? How's it going? I'm glad to finally talk to you in kind of sort of in person.
Yeah, well, as close as it gets these days. I guess this is the safest way now we get to talk
Yeah,
about
that's a good point.
it. It's been a long week, so hopefully you're winding down, able to relax a little bit. And
Yeah, we'll see.
yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know. It's Friday the 13th, so I guess it was going to be a kind of a crazy day, but it seems like
Yeah.
it's been a really long week in comics.
Oh, has it? I mean, well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a long week for me. I'm actually curious why it's been a long week in comics from your perspective, though.
Well, I mean, it feels like with all the kind of the shutdowns, the uncertainty. I mean, we get a lot of people kind of complaining at each other. There's a lot more raw nerves and raw emotions these days. I'm seeing
Yeah.
a lot of people pop off than they used to.
Yeah. I'm in a weird space, man.
Mhm.
I've after a couple of years of being on comics Twitter
Mhm.
and kind of pulling my hair out and rage quitting a couple of times, I kind of finally got a handle on the type of conversations I have. And I've kind of somewhat divorced myself from, I can't completely divorce myself given where I work, but like I've somewhat divorced myself from being too stressed out about it. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm assuming you're talking like about some of the DC layoffs and all that stuff too.
Well, exactly. I mean, that
Yeah.
played this week. I think a lot of people at Marvel feel like the axe is hanging over their head, and there
Yeah.
is news happening there, and it just
Yeah.
everybody's tense. And it's also, I mean,
Yeah.
we went through a very draining election,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just there's a lot.
Hmm. No, I mean it's definitely in the air. I've just tried to kind of stay focused on work, like when things get this heady, because I don't know that crippling doubt and
Yeah.
frustration part of my brain will take over if I don't do that. So
Yeah. It
yeah,
it it takes it's easy to do, and I think I mean with the push to get on social media and kind of how we're consuming news, we're all in the house. There's even less human
yeah,
contact. It's not a good combo, but
mm-mm.
glad you're keeping yourself sane. You've just fixed already. I'm seeing some comments in the chat referencing today's little drama, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Okay,
But anyway, I'm glad you're here, and we'll kick this off. I don't know if I think sound like you're having some coffee, right? So
yeah. I got my little corner bakery coffee sitting right here next to me. So
very nice. I think by people who just tune into these videos and things, they must think I'm a crazy drunk, but I promise I don't drink nearly as much as it probably comes across. I am having a little bit of whiskey tonight,
oh, nice.
as Friday tradition would have it. Centauri has a lot of good cheap whiskey, and this is a good cheap
Okay,
whiskey. But
all right, yeah.
you're probably smart though. You've got the coffee. I think I probably need some. About an hour in, I'm gonna just you'll be carrying the cream. I'll be passed out.
Just start trailing off. I get that. I understand.
Oh, exactly. There is some good stuff though this week. Just for some people looking into it, I did, as promised, I recorded almost 2 hours of a retrospective on the Astonishing X-Men with Joe Corallo, and that's going to go up in the next
Ooh,
couple of days. You guys
nice,
will.
nice, nice.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, that's a fascinating comic too, because, and I think
Mhm.
we're going to talk a little bit about the late '90s, early 2000s tonight.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that came out sort of in the time period, kind of the tail end of the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people I think have forgotten is that first off, that comic sold well over 200,000 copies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, it held its numbers really well,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Despite despite delays too.
yeah, and it had a lot of delays.
Hmm.
I mean, one of the funny things in that people were sending couriers to John Cassidy's house to pick up pages, just to try and get them in so they could at least get something moving because it was so delayed.
Yeah.
Um, but it was also the height of, and it's hard to think about now. Joss Whedon was really at the top of his game then. I
Yeah.
mean, like he was the man that
He was
everybody.
the man, and he hadn't even made an Avengers movie yet.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah, this was pre his debut in the MCU, and it's amazing.
Mhm.
It's amazing to kind of think about that in hindsight, with where his
Yeah.
career definitely changed, and it's crazy. So
Yeah. Well, I don't. I mean, I guess you can get into the whole Ray Fisher thing or
Mhm.
whatever, but like, I mean, his career isn't dead. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Oh
he,
no, no.
it's interesting. I mean, I joked earlier on Twitter that I'm gonna give you a chiding about how great the MCU is. And I don't think everything about the MCU is great, but there are key things that I think are just uh, trigger points for me that make me just enjoy it so much.
Yeah.
And so when Joss Whedon, first of all, I'm a Buffy mark. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I got
Yep.
into Joss Whedon through Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I have been a huge fan of his ever since. And then X-Men came out, and it was like the best thing in the world because I was a Marvel kid. You know what I mean? And I was an X-Men fan. So like to have him on X-Men was great. But then then he transitioned into these Avengers movies, which was like even better, right? For me anyway.
Yeah.
And I think people kind of felt some kind of way about him exiting after Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
At the time, anyway. I think now people are kind of like, "Oh, the Russos are fine," like whatever, like But at the time, I think some people felt some kind of way. But I've always been kind of because of that, because of the way he exited and the things he was saying about the film at the time.
Yeah.
I've always kind of felt kind of bad for him because I feel like he was kind of handed this massive undertaking, and he took it head on, and then he had to follow it up with Ultron.
Yep.
And I can't blame him for being like, "All right, I'm tired, I'm out."
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't blame him for that at all.
No, I
Um,
mean, it
have
had
you
to be
been?
hard to be
Mhm.
at the beginning of that. And
Yeah,
I mean, at the time, Disney was, they were connecting these movies, but it
yeah,
certainly was not going to be the $1 billion a movie, just machine that it is. And
right.
that would be very daunting to go through.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I think that and so I bring all that up to say like he's been like kind of on extended hiatus. He did that Shakespeare movie
Mhm.
that I think that came out like a week after I think Ultron did.
Yep.
But he hasn't done anything at all as far as I can tell. And then I just saw recently that he's working on a project with Nick Frost, which I'm really excited about. But
That's right. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I mean, the thing he did in the middle, which seemed to kind of cement a lot of negative feelings, is he jumped over course and did Justice League,
right,
or
yeah,
the second half of that. And
yeah, yeah,
but a lot of people, I mean, I remember a lot of hatred for Zack Snyder back kind of when that move took place. And there was even a
yeah,
little bit of rumbling that, oh, Joss Whedon's going to come in and save it from, grim, dark, everything is bad Zack Snyder.
yeah.
And then like a year later, it has completely done a 180.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? Like Wheaton Wheaton's name is not on that movie for a reason.
Right, right.
Okay. And I feel bad I'm one of those people that I want to see the Snyder cut.
Mhm.
And I probably don't want to see the Snyder cut for the reasons that I won't say a lot of people want to see it, but for reasons that I see a lot of vocal people saying it, which is almost like they want to thumb their nose at the Marvel fans, or like they feel like they're getting something back.
Right.
I want to see the Snyder cut because I'm a big fan of authorial intent, and
Yep.
like it's important what the creator is saying more than any YouTube critic or hot take on Bleeding Cool, or
Yeah.
like random Twitter rage out. I really want to know what that person who made it was trying to accomplish. And for
Yeah, me
a
too.
major company like Time Warner to say, okay, our bad, here, try it again, I think that's really cool.
I do too. I really dislike the people who thought that was caving to the fans. I think that's a ridiculous take.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we've done director's cuts. We've done, Superman 2 had a complete, almost, recut done.
Hmm.
And this isn't the first time this has happened, but I think it's good that they're doing it. I'm like you. I would rather see a director's vision finished, even if I'm not a big fan of where it's going, because I want to see where it winds up. And I don't like I didn't like the switch, and I'm glad they're doing this, and so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if nothing else, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'm probably not the big. That's why I kind of joked with you. I'm not going to be the big debate partner for the MCU. I
Mm.
like the MCU more than I dislike it by a mile,
Hmm.
and I think it's all perspective. I mean,
Yeah.
I sat through Catwoman.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, you
Right.
can do worse.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is an element of that, right? Like, I don't know if you and I are around the same age, but I'm definitely of that generation where, like, you would read the back of a Marvel book and Stanley would say, James Cameron's making a Spider-Man movie and Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to
Yep.
play Dr. Octopus. And you're like, holy crap, this is going to happen. And then it
Yes.
never did, right?
Yes.
And, eventually we got those Sam Raimi movies, which I think have got a lot right and a lot wrong.
Yeah.
And you know, and I'm a big Sam Raimi fan, but like I at the same time I respect what he was trying to do. But there are certain characters in that anyway, there's certain characters that just don't work for me, particularly Mary Jane. But like so a part of me just kind of feels like, yeah, to get these MCU movies and to kind of be able to go, Captain America, that's Captain America.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? That's a huge deal. Like, even like you can kind of nitpick some details, like, okay, Hawkeye isn't really Hawkeye as we know him, even though Jeremy Renner could have played that Hawkeye really well. You know, and I'm of the camp that maybe Emily Blunt would have made a better Black Widow, because I think she probably would have done the accent. But and done it well. But at the same time, I'm like, they get so much right. And even on a even if it's just the embodiment or the spirit of those characters, they get so much right.
I mean, I'd rather see the movies out there and not like them than to not have them do it at all. I mean, which is
that's true. That's a good point.
That's good point. Producing them, and I like more of the MCU films than I dislike, and none of them are like I don't think there's a single MCU movie in my top 10 of all time. I like kind of very thoughtful, detailed art movies. You know, I like David Lynch. That's not going to be what you're going to get in the MCU. It doesn't mean I have to hate MCU. You know,
right? No, absolutely.
But I'm glad they're out there. It is funny that people get very, very uptight about it. Yeah. Let me get this one out of the way with you, because this is today's drama. And
what's going on? I missed this. Maybe I'm fortunate that I did.
It is this is one of those kinds of things that took me by surprise. So basically, the background behind this is, and there was a video I just posted up a little bit ago, so we'll do it briefly so people aren't getting it twice. Mark Doyle, DC editor, was working on the Batman books. And, he was part of the layoffs that occurred when they were announced a bit ago. And this was going to be his final week. So he was finally out the door. And Tom King posts a kind of a tribute to Mark Doyle. It was a nice enough tribute, just kind of saying what he's done. And yeah, so you're reading it now. Nobody saw coming. I don't think anybody saw this coming. Tom Brevoort runs in and basically points out that that Tom King, and it's true, there was an interview with a printed statement, kind of almost bragged a bit about getting Doyle kicked off the book because there's an argument over using David Finch for the proposal, Fitch for the proposal of Batman to Catwoman, and so he posts a pretty salty response here. And of course, it's getting a bunch of comments, a lot of comic people. The take that I find most interesting in all this is several people within the comic industry saying kind of the effect of "don't air that dirty laundry out here." And I get that take to some extent, but on the other hand, it's like, I mean, I don't know what to make of this. It was crazy. Yeah. It was a crazy exchange. I don't know. You just read it. This is not what you'd expect from a Brevoort in public, really.
Yeah, I was reading. So I was looking at the tweet, and I kind of read the tweet first, but didn't see who was attached to it. So that was like my real life response that you just got. Because then I literally reacted once I read who had actually said what. That's I can tell you, I can say this much about comics, man. Like, first of all, I don't even think we even talked about this at all. No, some people are like, who the hell's this guy? So I'm the content. I just recently became the content marketing manager for Previews catalog, and the extended Previews family. So that means like our YouTube, our social media, our website. And like I'm sure your audience knows what Previews is. It's been around for decades now. It's basically how your local comic shop gets, I'll say just about almost everything that hits their shelves. So yeah, so I went from, actually my history with comics is I went from being a fan, of course, right, to working in a comic shop. And I promise this is going to come back around, to working in a comic shop, to creating comics, which I still do on the side, which is not a surprise. Everybody seems to do that in comics. And And now I work for Diamond Comics Distributors, and
Mhm.
who owns the previews brand, the previews catalog. And one thing I desperately wanted to get away from after having done all those things in comics, especially once I started creating them, and like I noticed it's just like the backbiting.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Like it's not. I
Doesn't.
just yeah, I just don't understand it, and like I've never quite. I've always tried to distance myself from it because A, I don't think it's useful, but also this is my happy place.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this is the Serenity Now place that I go to personally. Like my girlfriend jokes sometimes because she'll catch me in the other room like it's a dirty like it's like I'm doing something dirty here. She'll catch me in the other room reading a comic in the corner. She'll like, Troy, blah blah blah. Oh, okay. You're in your happy place. I'll leave. You know what I mean? Like I mean and like I think it's just that clear on my face that I am enjoying myself. And like the fact that I get to work in comics is such a big deal for me. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I sometimes see how some of these it can be creators, it can be fans. Like I'll be honest with you, it's also fans.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it's not and it's not creators who are just in the industry, but also creators who are not like are in the fringes of the industry, right? I just see how they come at each other all the time. And I'm like, why are you still doing this if this is how you want to, if this is how you feel? Like it's just so puzzling to me.
I agree. I completely agree with you. And it is the puzzling part of all this is, and it's the most, I think, one of the most destructive things that goes on. There's this constant sniping and a lot of two-faced kind of behavior. And somebody in the chat saying, what does backbiting mean? That means like, behind your back, somebody is insulting you or tearing you down.
Yeah.
And it's not that I think the industry should be this big, closed circle camaraderie. Everybody must agree, but it is, this case, this whole thing that kind of spawned this off, and probably the clue as to why Tom Brevoort got so irritated
Mm.
is that King did this interview where he basically bragged that once you're a big name, you can get people off books, and he got to be a big name, and I was able to get this guy off books.
Mm.
And it tasted wrong
Mm.
when it came out. It didn't sound positive. It wasn't
Mm.
helpful for the company. And so then I think, a couple of years later, I guess about a year later, we get this kind of very touching tribute. It just rings false. And so I think
Mm.
for a lot of people, it's like the cork burst. It was like, you can't contain this, but it is, there's a lot of manipulative behavior, and it's sad because like you, comics is my happy place, whether I'm selling
Yeah.
them in the shop, and we'll
Mm.
talk about previews in a minute because that is the lifeline of every retailer.
Yeah.
But it really is it's tough. It's very tough to be this so in love with this industry, and there's still lots of things to love about it, and then to see this part of it. It's like you said, you just kind of have to hide for you. You have to kind of segment yourself off social media at
Yeah.
some point because it drives you nuts.
Yeah. I mean, like I nuked my old account just because you kind of get to a point where, uh, you just can't escape it, And I found myself not enjoying it, and I had to kind of check myself and like kind of be like, okay, what am I not enjoying about this? And it turns out that it was, I won't even say the people in the industry, but the people that I was that I was being insulated by, you know what I mean? Like the people
Yeah.
around me. And yeah, I just kind of had to stop doing that because again, like the funny thing is, so I went to school for filmmaking. Like that was my thing. Like I wanted to be a movie director, right? That was my big dream, right? And then what happened was the more I found out about the process of making movies, the less I liked it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yep.
the more time I spent doing production work and being a production assistant, the less I liked it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I kind of quit myself going in that direction with comics. And I was like, no, I can't do that here. Like, you know what I mean? So I was like, I need to do my own self check. And that's kind of where I am now.
It's smart. I mean, you can't drive yourself out of the industry. And as somebody in the chat is saying, the idea is that all fortunes rise together. The idea of kind of high tides and helping each other out. It is a concept that seems lost in the industry to some extent. And the other part is it is also true that some of it is spurned on and blown out of proportion by the fans. That is true. That we tend to really fixate on drama and some of this stuff. It's entertaining for some. At the same time, I'll say, going to a lot of cons, and you just spend any length of time with some of these people, and some of the nastiest comments about each other, like I said, backbiting comments. It's crazy. It's actually a lot angrier under the surface than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah. No, it's definitely like there definitely have been interactions I've had in the past where it's just like it's very much under the surface of a conversation I've had with a fan or a creator. Like again, like I see it on both sides. Like I think, I know that there's a portion of the community that kind of feels like, oh, it's the creator's fault. I know there's a portion of the community that's like, oh, it's the fans' fault. But I got to be honest with you, man. I'm very much in the middle. You'll find I'm in the middle about a lot of stuff, and maybe some of it's apathy. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, you kind of get there after a while. The drama after a while,
and I think that part of that might be I am a Gen Xer, like so that apathy is real.
Yeah,
but at the same time, like, yeah, I look at some of this stuff and I'm just like, really? Okay, I don't care anymore. Like, you know what I mean? I just move on. So
it's hard because at the end of the day, you do have people pouring a lot of passion onto the page, writing, drawing. You have some of the biggest characters and properties in the world, and so it shouldn't be tainted with all this stuff. But it is crazy.
No, it shouldn't be.
Well, on to something happier. We'll get past that. So, well, actually, this is a good thing. So we won't need to go through all this, but this is the comics coming next week, and it's a good time to kind of actually talk to you a little bit about previews. So, previews is, I am not a boomer, by the way. I'm Gen X, so come on. I'll stand by that ground. In the chat there. So previews, I think most of the people in the chat knows what previews is. As you said, this, I can't understate enough. This is what the shops need to do anything. I mean, if previews didn't exist, we'd be in a lot of trouble. This is how we manage our business. And it's such a high risk now. But one thing that I think some people misunderstand, because I get this question from time to time, the solicitations and the artwork and the content that goes into previews, that is not produced by you. That's coming from the publisher, correct?
Yes. So so here's the way the previews breaks down. Like I can tell you how I work in the marketing department, and the way that this works is we have a catalog side. We really recently, and I want to say maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, have started focusing on the digital side. So we're working on something called Previews Pullbox right now, which is allowing people to place orders. It's like in a beta test, and a bunch of shops are already participating in it. Where it allows the consumer to set up orders with their local comic shop ahead of time, or even sometimes at the last minute, depending on availability, and order through our site so that they can pick up from their local store. Beyond that, so my side is really the digital side of that portion. And so we also, of course, have the cons that we go to, and so we have a presence at those conventions and whatnot. But a lot of it is focused. A lot of my day-to-day is focused on what the catalog is focusing on, what's coming up this week. You know what I mean? And how can I basically generate excitement around it? And so, I'm looking at this list right now. I'm like, there's a couple books on here that I'm definitely going to pick up. So,
sure.
Yeah.
It is. I sometimes get to comment, and we'll get to the DC bit in a second, but I sometimes get to comment, like I've complained before about the way that the company, the products get marketed and pushed, but that's not a preview's fault. In fact, I think in many cases, you're making the best with what you're given, and what you're given sometimes.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I say what you're given is sometimes just not ideal. Or
it's I don't want to it's tough, right? Because look, I work in marketing, and marketing is all about relationships, right? And so I always want to maintain a good relationship with the publishers and their marketing people. And so look, some publishers are better at it than others. And I think that one of the things that I have, when I've had the opportunity to talk to a publisher and kind of be like, look, what you have here is cool, but maybe you're explaining it wrong. The one thing that I see a lot of that I am so tired of, and I think you just talked about this in one of your videos not too recently, is the solicitation that says, a mysterious thing happens that's a mystery, and then the mystery unravels over the course of several issues. What is the mystery? Find out. And it's like that's and it's there's a term that I call, well, I don't call it this. J.J. Abrams actually called it this. It's called the mystery box, right?
Right.
And if you look at any J.J. Abrams movie, it's all about the mystery box. It's all about what is the thing and how do we get to it and what is actually inside that thing, whatever it is. And that thing could be Ray, it could be, I don't know if you ever watched Alias back in the day, but it could be like the box that Sidney Bristow's after. It could be the rabbit's foot from Mission Impossible 3, right?
Yep.
But like, that's his thing. And I feel like comics have gotten obsessed with the mystery box. And I don't know when that started happening, but it's definitely something that's happened in the last like 10 years, I want to say. And nothing beats, I did an interview with Rick Remender and it's on Previous World, the YouTube right now. And one of the things we talked about and I think one of the things that I noted, and then I was glad to hear you say when you were reviewing Scumbag, was that simple pitches are the most effective, and that's why that book moves so many units.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's funny because Scumbag, I like Black Science quite a bit. Mm-hmm. I think that's a much better book than Scumbag.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that a lot. I have not read Black Science. I need to, actually.
Yeah, really deep book, a lot of good concepts going on. Very hard, I would say, to explain the pitch, and I watched Remender try and do it several times, and just it never really felt like he got the pitch down to where you really understood what you were getting. And it wasn't, it just kind of floundered out there. But yeah, Scumbag was marketed just very clean, very simple, right? And it's old. And I think, but that's one area where, and I've been beating up on marketing from the publisher side quite a bit lately, because I do think, I don't think it's that hard. But I do think they find lots of ways to get in their own way.
Yeah, no, and I do feel that I have to look at these solicitations on a regular basis, and a lot of times I reword them, based off of what I find interesting about them, because a lot of what I feel is, oh, hey, what's up, Brandon Perlow? Sorry, I just saw someone call me out because I also do stuff for the Urban Action Showcase. Nice. But like, yeah, it's it's too mysterious. Like, I think, it's like the simple explanation is often the right one, right? I mean, that's kind of how the cliche goes. And the same could be said for like, how you solicit your comic. Let people know the thing that is going to hook them, and don't lead them along for several issues by not explaining anything. Now, I say all that. I like Jonathan Hickman's X-Men, and I found it really interesting to see how they explain Ten of Swords versus my actual experience of reading Ten of Swords.
Yeah, talk about that one. So
yeah, right. And my experience of reading Ten of Swords has actually been very enjoyable. But before going into that book, I had a really hard time pitching it to people because I wasn't quite sure what it was about. Well,
yeah, and I mean, it's also a case where Ten of Swords, I remember the early promo work, and so this was interrupted by the pandemic for sure. That didn't help matters.
Right. Yeah.
But they were doing the solicitations with kind of tarot statements. And I don't think the creative teams and the title and the run and any of that had gotten to the point where they had the credibility to go with kind of very vague statements for all the books. I think Hickman carries some of that. He can pull that off, but I don't think the rest of them were there yet. So it I don't know. It made it. Well, we'll get to Ten of Swords in a minute, but at least with this list, you said there were some titles on here you're really looking forward to.
Yeah,
I've gotten some questions about the list. We'll answer those. I love this one right here. Like, how is Looney Tunes at number 257, but Aquaman is at 65? Oh, the magic of reboots.
That is interesting.
I love that. You look at the Marvel books, and they're all kind of grouped there at the top, and the amount of double-digit titles is under 10. I was just seeing if it was under 5. It just goes over 5.
Yeah.
It's a sign of the times.
It is. Yeah.
Here's a question for you. Are previews, are the solicits meant to inform retailers or interest readers?
So that's okay. Actually, that's a great question. And that has been the ongoing struggle in terms of what are we ultimately trying to accomplish. And I think that we're at a point now. Look, without explaining too much about it, there's been a lot of sea changes at Diamond lately, and not just because of the coronavirus, not just because of distribution, but those changes were already in play before those things came out, before those things happened. And one of the conversations that we were having during the course of that sea change, during the course of before the sea change happened, was who are we pitching this for? Like, are we pitching it to the store or are we pitching it to the consumer? And there was always kind of like a little bit of a power struggle about that. But that's not, it's early. It's still early in the sea change era, the sea change period. But like, I feel like we're at a point now where it's clearly we're pitching these ideas to the consumer, and it's a no-brainer so that they can go to the comic book store and buy these things. You know what I mean? But I think there was a mentality that was very much an old guard mentality that didn't really want to budge from, well, the retailers are buying it, and that's all that matters. And I think that that's important, but I think it's also, especially in this digital era where everyone can look at an algorithm or some analytic data and tell you this is what people are paying attention to. You know what I mean? And because people are paying attention to this is why they will buy this product. So it's kind of weird to kind of do the inverse of that still in 2020. And I think we finally are starting to win that conversation internally. So
I think that this is a great question, and this is almost like unlocking a giant mystery. So it's as we talk about comics and the business and what's being marketed to what, I feel like there's this giant, it's the mystery box, if you will. There's a clue in here, and I think we're really stumbling on it of who are the comics aimed for, and
yeah.
I love the way you describe this, because there is absolutely, and at the publisher level, I think there's even more of it. There is that old school, old guard mentality of our job is to sell to the shops. We don't really care about the consumers. Maybe not that blunt, but just
right. Yeah,
that's kind of the store's problem. And that's as you very correctly identified with the world of how digital is changing and how people can look up comics and the instant feedback you get on YouTube and with everything else. That doesn't work anymore. That thought process is gone.
No, and that's kind of like part of the mentality behind Pullbox, which is like, and again, it's in beta. A lot of stores have already bought into it, which is great. But like the idea behind it is like, we can tell you what people are clicking on because we have everything in our database. And I mean everything. Like, we have stuff that goes back to like the late 80s. You know what I mean? Because we're Diamond and we've been putting that stuff out forever. So it's all in our database, and you can look at it, or you can, in a lot of cases, you can still order it. And especially if it's in the last, 3-4 months, because of the way that things cycle out for us. So yeah, like that's a very, very much a cornerstone of like the idea behind Pullbox is we're trying to embolden the retailer, give them the information that they need so that they can sell better.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
It's a tough business. Jamie here writes, ideally there should be a retailer's version of previews that tells them the essential stuff they need to know and order correctly and a separate customer edition with the redactions and blackouts. And in some ways, Marvel does put out those little mini catalogs. Like, there are attempts here.
Yeah.
And by the way, I was signed up to be on the beta program. My shop is still not opened up again, so hopefully
that's right. Yeah.
I don't know. Our state, I'm in Washington State here. We are going back to phase 1. It looks like on Monday, a full lockdown, shut down. So yay. But anyway, it's an interesting, I can't, this is a very interesting part of the business. And it is a place where it feels like a tiny bit of tuning and getting it right would equal a 10 to 15% lift in the business relatively easily.
Relatively easily. And Jamie, for Jamie, previewsworld.com is that space. If you, as a kid, I went to the comic shop and I would pick up previews because I saw Batman and Predator on the cover, you know what I mean? And I didn't necessarily know what to do with it, until I became a store manager. But like at the same time, as a consumer or a potential consumer, it was cool to just look through, right? But now we're kind of at a point now where, the catalog can be for you, the retailer and the consumer, but previewsworld.com is definitely for the consumer. And you're going to see a lot of that in the near future.
Excellent. I mean, it's an area that is within your control. So I'm anxious to see the modernization, the things that you're doing there. And I know we have a couple of people in the chat. I know Yul Carter is a retailer as well.
Good.
And I'm sure he's very interested as well in how these things move and what changes and how. I don't want to put you in a weird spot, so I'll ask this question carefully. And I totally understand. I'm just thankful you're giving us the time.
Yeah, cool.
So DC leaving, kind of doing their own thing. Is there anything you could say kind of like how was that absorbed within the company? What was kind of the feeling there?
I mean, it was, it's DC. I mean, look, it's DC, right? I mean, like they're comics, like it's Marvel and DC, whether or not you're an indie person or a big two guy, Marvel and DC are comic books. Like to the majority of the world, that's what people think of when they think of comic books, right? And especially with Pullbox, it would have been nice to have them fully integrated.
Yeah.
When that unveils. But at the same time, I can tell you straight up, the things I can tell you is, look, first of all, it's not a complete devastation because DC is still doing UK distribution with us.
Right.
And on top of that, DC is going to be part of Pullbox because it is a service that we are providing for stores, and stores still get stuff from DC Comics. You know what I mean? So because it's really a reservation service in a lot of ways, it's a pre-order service. So yeah, I mean, it's me personally, like I can tell you, I'm just like, oh man, that's it's just like, really. But at the same time, I can tell you, like, look, the front half of the catalog is what we call the premier publishers. That's Boom. That would have been DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, Dynamite. They have plenty to offer, but look, the back half of the catalog has even more. And I kind of feel like, I don't know, me personally, I'm at this point where the indie guys, I want to know what they're doing because, I'm a kid. We were going to talk about this later in the show, but like I'm from the 2000s era of really, really getting into comic books. Like I loved comics in the 90s, right? But the 2000s is where they kicked the brakes off and just had a ball. And you get more of that in the back half of the catalog, So I think that we're at a point now where we can focus more on those publishers, which I'm excited about, and the manga publishers too, which I'm also excited about. So
the whole thing is a tough situation because I am a big believer in competition breeds forward momentum, and I think that's a healthy thing. I think having everything through Diamond in some cases was creating some stagnant behavior, and I think that that's true of the comic shops as well. I mean, there are a lot of people who were just used to doing it the one way, and they didn't think about it. And I think a lot of retailers are not managing their business either. So overall, I'm glad to see some forced change and all the rest. I hope that this does start to spawn some really different things, and that would be a great change. But real quick, so first off, thank you to everybody, by the way, who's joining us in the chat. It's a nice evening. Having a great conversation here with Troy from Previews World and Diamond, and we'll put the URL back up there a little bit later. Having some nice whiskey. You're having some coffee.
Yep.
So, and hello to Nerdette, who's got a great channel. A lot of, and Yul's got a great wrestling chat. There's a lot of great people in here, so always very good.
Oh yeah, Nerdette Newsstand. I see your comments on YouTube.
Yeah, there you go. I'm just glad
she makes herself known.
Absolutely. It's glad I think we're entering a new phase with YouTube, by the way. I think over the next year, you're going to see some new faces kind of rise up and get a lot more prominence. And I like the variety of voices. It's always nice.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question for you coming in the chat. So they're asking you the doom and gloom with DC. There's, and it really seemed to pick up again this week. Yeah. I'm not sure, as people were highlighting the additional layoffs that they announced this week, but it wasn't a surprise, or at least, I mean, this was telegraphed to some extent. I mentioned it to somebody else, like they mentioned that some more was coming in November, and it came in November, but it did take some people by surprise. Do you think DC is like, what would you say to somebody who asks you, is it all doom and gloom?
Okay, well, let me take off my diamond hat for a second here, right?
There you go.
All right, so here's the deal, right? I personally feel like DC is making some smart decisions. I was happy to see that they selected a veteran like Mary Javins to be the editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
I've had nothing but positive experiences with her. You know,
Okay.
they've been all of two, but I've had positive experiences with her. Um, I think that something could be said for creating prestige format content, for lack of a better term, that isn't just a floppy, to appeal to a wider audience, but also to give you more value for what you're getting out of your book. And sometimes value isn't necessarily just more pages, it's just
Right.
better quality, like, overall. And like, I'm reading the Three Jokers, I'll be honest with you.
Hmm.
And I like the Three Jokers. Actually, I haven't read the third one yet. I've heard some things about it so far, but I haven't read the third one yet. But uh and like when I look at the Black Label books, I look at a high quality production, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like I like if I could just kind of like dive into this for a second. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
when I was going to San Diego last year, I took 3 copies of Batman Damned with me. I had not read the book yet. And I always kind of still have, even though I work in comics, I still have that moment where I'm like, I still feel a little weird reading comics in public, right? We're not Japan, right? Like we don't break out the manga and just read it in public here, right? Um,
Hmm.
and I did not have that moment with Batman Damned, bat penis and all. Like
I
I,
was not going to ask. I was sitting here biting my tongue. I was waiting
uh,
to
I could get into that too. That's a whole other thing because I really hate how the media focused on that. And at the end of the day, it's Brian Azzarello and Lee Bermejo. They told a good story, but whatever.
you had to really
Um,
get to see it. I mean, no
you're right.
joke.
Yeah.
That was not clear.
Right, right. But yeah, but like I read it on the plane. Like I read all 3 issues on the plane, and I think something could be said for the thinking behind that. Like the thinking that like whoever came up with that concept, and that was on Dan Didio's watch for whatever reason, but like the mentality behind, let's give people something that they feel good about reading in public, like whether or not that was intentional or not. There's something about that format, that style, the presentation of the Black Label books thus far that I think is the future of comics in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Okay.
And it also means that you don't have to completely uh, like knock out the periodical format. You just need to kind of rethink how you do it.
Yeah.
And like on the flip side, I think that what Marvel's doing with the X-Men books is also a smart play. I think that to have a creator that people recognize and trust to curate a line of books. Okay, yes, maybe too many,
Maybe future.
maybe too many. But to curate a line of books and to kind of take you on this ride. And we know because he's Jonathan Hickman and we read his Fantastic Four, we read his Avengers, we got to Secret War and we liked it, right? So we're
Yeah.
willing to trust that he knows where this is going. You know what I mean? And that's sort of like that curated quality experience. Like, it's not just as simple as like tell a good story, right? Um but it's also about how you present that story to the public and how you get that story out periodically, and also how that book is formatted. Like it's all those things factor into it. And yeah, I see promise.
Hmm.
I see promise in a lot of directions. I think, I don't like the floppies have to die crowd. I don't think that's necessary. I'm not a fan of things have to die for something to succeed.
Thank
Uh,
you. I totally agree.
yeah,
I thank you very much. I think that there's too much of that. We have to burn it all down. Like we can only deal with one thing at a time. And the
yeah,
reality is anytime there's been evolution in anything, not just comics, but technology or anything, there's always a transition period. There's always several things going on. And oftentimes the old can inform the new and vice versa. You can improve both things at once. We don't have to end all floppies in order to, get a solid graphic novel format.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And like, I think that something could be said for the manga format.
Sure.
To like, I'm starting to read more manga now than I used to. Like, I kind of would like kind of experiment with it, like in the like here and there. And now I'm kind of like, yeah, I'll read this whole series. Why the heck not? Um, I also think that there are parallels to the way serials and manga work. Like I kind of feel like people love to break out One Piece and be like, see, this is how you generate an audience over time. But I'm like, comics do that. They just do it with less pages.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
you know what I mean?
you can't all be One But yeah, exactly. It is. I have such fond memories, and it was interesting. I absolutely know what you mean. Where you have these moments. I'm on a plane a lot, or I used to be anyway, and I always take comics and I take tablets with digital. It's funny for me. The push to accept digital was a result of traveling. If you're traveling, you're not going to be traveling around with a ton of comics. It's just
Right.
physically impossible.
Right.
But I have such good memories of being on the JR train in Tokyo, which I lived over there for several months. And it's like you'd sit down, or in some cases stand, depending on where you're going. And like 2/3 of the train is filled with people reading manga, and they've got their books out. And it's like 60-year-old businessman, 14-year-old kid sitting there on the train reading manga. And it was always, I have pictures that I should post at some point. It was wonderful to see. I wish that culture would be more over here, but of course we don't have the train system either. So anyway, always good stuff.
No, yeah, and I think that there's a part of me that kind of wonders sometimes if we're still. I mentioned this on our weekly show a few weeks back. Like if we're still paying for the damage that Frederick Wortham did.
Feels like it.
Like, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like that shame that's like around comics. It seems to be very much maybe westernized, but definitely an American thing. Yeah. And yeah, I sometimes wonder about that. Like did Frederick Wortham do such irrevocable damage that even though, the Silver Age came around and the industry got its footing again, right? Like people still kind of have this redheaded stepchild of the media world mentality about comics. And every now and then I'll see some joker on Twitter or YouTube, and it pisses me off every time I see it. And I keep saying, Troy, don't fall for the clickbait, but I fall for it. But we'll say something like superheroes are, a product of fascism, and Batman is nothing more than a cop, and he wouldn't know what to do with a movement like Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, these characters have not been the character that you're describing since the 60s at least.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like since the Silver Age at the very least, like especially the Marvel characters. Like, you know what I mean? And we went through the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams era where Green Lantern is being confronted by a black guy on the street, and the black guy is like, you worry about the yellow man and the green man, but what about the black man? You know what I mean? Like comics have been addressing these things forever. And it always boils my blood when some think piece pops up, on BuzzFeed, or I don't even know what any of these sites are anymore, but and they make these comments, and I'm like, this is what happens if all you read is Watchmen, and you say you're a comic book reader, and you know what I mean? It's just like this is not what comics have not been this for decades.
Right. No, it's amazing how many people have Watchmen is their view of what the industry is all about and all it is, and it's you could tell, you could almost always spot it out. It's they read one or two things. That's all they've got. It's frustrating. On this list, so what is exciting you on this list? And for the people in the chat, what are you into? We've got 3 Ten of Swords books. This last week almost killed me with 3 Ten of Swords books.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I should not be reviewing them all. That is a mistake. But
well, yeah, if you have to review that's a whole other thing. Yeah. So okay. So I can tell you right now, I am reading Ten of Swords, and I'm collecting them all. Yep. I am reading the X-Men book specifically because I'm reading just the Hickman books. I'm buying those in my comic shop. Shout out to Alliance Comics and Games in downtown Silver Spring. And then I get the other books digitally, because I got to conserve space, to be honest.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, I am definitely reading that. I'm going to pick up the Marvel's Indigenous Voices book, just because I'm a big fan of Marvel leaning into their history instead of going around saying, which I feel like they were doing a couple of years ago, instead of going around saying this character is the first fill in the blank diversity character. When if you've been reading these books for a long time, that's not true. If I sit there, I would sit there and look, I've read some Kamala Khan. I actually like Kamala Khan. I think she's a good character. But when people are going around calling her the first Muslim superhero, it's like, no, And
Right.
the first, or even the first Muslim Marvel superheroes, like that's absolutely not true. Like I read just a few years ago Captain Britain in MI13, and they made Captain Britain a Muslim woman. She was a paramedic.
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, you guys are so full of it. So anyway, sorry.
Well, yeah. I mean, you had that. You had Dust. You
Yeah.
had
Oh yeah.
various characters in the Black Adam sphere for
Yep.
DC. You have a lot. I'm always bothered, and I hate the narrative. By the way, when you push back on that stuff, you're like, no, this isn't. That's not true. It's like, oh, you just hate the character or whatever
Yeah.
it is. No, I just hate. I hate lies. That's
Yeah.
I
Well,
love facts.
I mean, yeah, it's like, and I also kind of feel like I hate being accused of, I hate when I feel like the conversation around that is like comic books are like some backwards medium that just hasn't advanced. Like, it's the same thing what we were saying about, like, superheroes are fascists, right? It's
Yeah.
that mentality like, oh, this is the first ever type of blank character, right?
Yeah.
And, it's that mentality that like comic books have taken this long to get caught up to a contemporary mentality. When truthfully, look, there are movies. I would say the bulk of Hollywood is way more behind than
Oh, for
comic
sure.
books are.
100%.
And yeah,
Yeah, it is funny. The comic industry is, and it's weird when the comic industry itself, people are like, oh, we're behind Hollywood, or we're not as progressive with different types of ideas, a variety of characters as other forms of media. It's like I beg to differ. I think it's the
yeah,
opposite. I think
yeah.
comics is way ahead of everybody else. In
Way
many
ahead of everybody else. Okay, but anyway, I'm sorry, my bad.
Well,
So
okay, so what about Image over here? So there's some Image
Mhm.
books. Somebody asked way up in the chat about Commanders in Crisis. I was not a fan of issue number one. I wanted to like it. I
Mhm.
like Steve Orlando. I think he's a good guy, but it was
Mhm.
I don't know. What did you read any of these, and are you following these? I mean, on this list, Seven to Eternity, it's nice to see that back, and
Yep.
Ice Cream Man is a very good anthology series.
Yeah.
What are you liking?
Okay, so yeah, I can tell you Seven to Eternity. I'm a big Rick Remender fan. Been a Rick Remender fan since Uncanny X-Force. Die, which is like the evil version of Jumanji, and that's by Kieran Gillen. That's actually really cool, and I actually really like that book. I'm behind on it because I only read the 6-issue trade, so I'm not at number 15 yet, but I'm planning to get there. I've heard good things about Ice Cream Man. I have not read it yet. Let's see
Yeah,
here. What else we got?
it's quirky. It's horror. I think Die, by the way, I've had some customers dip in and dip out of that. I
Mhm.
think that book reads much better if you read several at a time. I think
Yeah.
month by month, it's a little tougher of a go.
And I think that's something else that publishers need to kind of recognize is like, what is this writer's strengths? Like, is this
Yeah.
writer better suited to a trade? Is this writer better suited to a monthly? What else we got here? Something That's Killing the Children is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a good one. I want to read these new Umbrella Academy books, but I am like so far behind. I tried to get a Hotel Oblivion. I picked up all the issues, and it's not that they're bad or anything like that. I just haven't gotten around to them.
Yeah.
What else here? Bad Mother from a Wave Blue. No, sorry. Okay, Lisa was going to kill me for that.
Artisans.
AWA, yeah. You're right. Yeah, that. You said what's that? I'm sorry.
It just rolls off the tongue. It's
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, from AWA. That's interesting. Actually, AWA in general is very interesting. Like, they're kind of. I miss Vertigo, and I know a lot of people do. And there's a lot of like Vertigo people kind of creating Vertigo houses in different areas. Like Ahoy Comics is another one of those places that they're kind of doing Vertigo type stuff. And AWA is another one of them. Yeah, like I said, I like the Three Jokers. Like, I'm going to finish that and pick up the last issue. And I'm curious about Rorschach, actually. Like, some of the stuff that Tom King said in the initial pitch for it made me way more curious about it than I thought I would be.
Yeah, I'm anxious. King said that he was going to he was not going to rely on his standard kind of storytelling means and do some different things. And I am interested to see how that all shakes out. I suspect that's going to be a better trade book as well, in many ways. But it's an interesting week next week. There's definitely some stuff I think from the sales. The Dawn of X stuff's going to probably dominate. I would guess Rorschach will do well. Batman 103 is probably your DC top seller. I don't think that's a big prediction.
Right. I need to get into Immortal Hulk. I don't know. I just kind of had like this weird brain fart with that book. I'm a Peter David Hulk guy.
Yeah, me too.
And
Yeah.
so whenever I had this kind of moment, which is weird because Peter David's Hulk was such a departure for that character when it came out. But when I see people doing non-Peter David stuff with the Hulk, it kind of gives me pause. Speaking of Peter David, symbiote Spider-Man King in Black. I'm all
Yeah.
about Peter David on Spider-Man.
I think he's doing a good take. I think I'm interested to see probably the next 2 issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Nick Spencer's in the middle of kind of the arc he's been building to his entire time. It's very dark. We got
Yeah.
neck snapping going on and other things, and this one feels like it's a make or break. Like he's going to either land the ending with this series and be kind of cemented as a good writer, or it's gonna, if it botches, it's gonna be really bad. So it's like it's gonna go one direction or another. I like Peter David's Spider-Man, or sorry, but I like his Hulk. I liked his Spider-Man as well, but I like his Hulk, and it's probably one reason why I'm not as big a fan of Immortal Hulk as many others. I want to like it. They're doing new things with it, but it's still, I don't know. It's a different era of Hulk to me. You can't always get what you want. So
No, yeah, exactly. I mean, like the way I see it, like there's definitely some Peter David Hulks I definitely have never read. So you know, it's Al Ewing's turn, and that's totally cool. I think Al Ewing's actually a good writer. I just, you know, this horror, this cosmic horror take that they're doing. I think it's going to take a trade and me sitting down to read it to like kind of feel it out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. So, Ten of Swords, which is a nice segue there. So, you're enjoying this series. I want to enjoy it. I think that I really want to enjoy this series. This week was a weird tipping point for me. I think I was struggling with bits of it, and this week was the roller coaster downhill.
Oh, okay, all right.
But I'm not. But what people have heard me complain about it already on videos. What are you loving about this event, and what do you like?
Overall, like Hickman's, you know, like I like Hickman's this whole Dawn of X, I guess if you want to call it, right? Like we're talking about the House and Powers of 10 and like, you know, like all these additional books that have spawned out of that, and Ten of Swords is like this giant experiment in world building. And for somebody who kind of threw in the towel with the X-Men a while ago, it's kind of cool to refamiliarize myself with whatever their new status quo is. And I saw some people early on kind of getting up in arms, like saying, oh, the X-Men are bad guys, I don't like it. But I kind of find that interesting. Like, and we can go back and forth about whether or not they're good guys or bad guys, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is like they're in murky territory.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't. It seems like more of a more recent complaint. When the first few months of Dawn of X, people weren't, making the kind of comments like they're, plant people, fascist, drug runners, whatever the kind of different things out there. The whole drug running thing seems to have kind of been forgotten. I don't know. It's like they were distributing medicine, but that plot hasn't really been picked up on much. But for me, I feel like Ten of Swords has been a bait and switch in a lot of ways. It's like you're going to have a tournament, but we're spending a long time getting these swords. I mean, 2/3 of the book was getting the swords.
Right, yeah.
And then that was a lot of decompression. And what struck me was like, I just did the Astonishing X-Men retrospective, and so you had 26 issues there by Whedon and Cassidy. And Ten of Swords is going to have more pages than that. It's going to be a bigger overall event.
Yeah.
I just, like 2 issues ago, they were having dinner. It's like, what are we doing?
Right. I mean, I get people's frustration with it, but at the same time, I mean, I also grew up reading Chris Claremont's X-Men, and Chris Claremont talks a lot.
It's decompression, and I guess it comes down to, if you enjoy the journey, then you're having a good time. I don't know. So what's your prediction here? How many tournament matches are we going to get? Because it seems very clear to me we're getting more than 10. Like,
yeah. Well,
where do you think they're going to?
So I have not gone to my comic shop in about 2 weeks now. So also keep that in mind. Like, I'm actually sitting on probably 5 books, I guess, at this point. And actually I'm planning to go this Sunday. But my predictions, and I mean, if this has already happened, let me know. I have a feeling that Magneto's going to show up with the sword space station as his sword. That's
Mm,
just me. Like, I have a feeling that that might be the case. Like, currently where I'm at, they're still collecting swords, and like we haven't gotten to the tournament portion yet.
mhm.
Um, but there's one really big thing that's really appealing to me about this, and it's Apocalypse, and kind of like foreboding character, right? He's always been really ominous, and when Apocalypse shows up, you know shit's gonna go down, right? And so for him to walk onto Krakoa and accept this mutant culture willingly, and now we're finding out that he's tied to the Omniverse and the Captain Britain Corps and Saturnine,
Mhm.
and like he had a whole family,
Mhm.
as well during this time, and that we always kind of got this this feeling of Apocalypse is like this sad old man
Right.
who's focused on survival of the fittest, and like to see that kind of that being like kind of branched out and kind of explained in some really significant detail is really fascinating to me, especially because Hickman did a series called Shield, Architects of Forever,
Right. Yep.
and I loved that book. Like, hands down, love that book. And one of the coolest things in that comic was that you got to see Apocalypse on the battle lines, like of in Egypt back in the day, and him and Emotep going toe to toe with the Brood.
Right.
And he had the shield, right, that ultimately became the symbol of Nick Fury, the Nick Fury organization. And I always thought to myself, I was like, I want to know more about this. You know what I mean? And I don't know if we're going to get that in Ten of Swords, but the fact that we're getting more
Eh,
of that Apocalypse story is really cool to me.
yeah. Well, now I don't want to spoil it for you. I wish I'd
Okay, all right.
I would hold out the funnest little trivia contest of like throwing out like 3 fake things and 1 real thing and trying to see if you could guess what was gonna happen. Oh, yeah, well, we'll have to just so nobody in the chat give it away here, but I'll have to check in with you once you've read the
Okay,
last couple and see where you're at.
okay,
This week took a turn, I would say.
okay. Interesting. All right. Okay.
I will say I don't. This isn't. Well, I guess it is, but it's not. The idea of having Magneto show up with the whole sword space station and just using it to wreak some damage would be super welcome at this
Yeah.
point. I would be all for it right now. Uh, it is. How did you like? Oh, so I'm not going to say why, and again, the chat will have to please. You're all those of you who've been reading along. You're all in it with me now. Um, how did you like the New Mutants issue where Doug is getting his sword and he's basically going to be facing certain death and there's a dynamic? How did you like that issue in this series?
The one where he gets well, basically when Warlock becomes his sword,
Yeah,
right?
and then
Yeah.
Magic training him and Gorgon
Yeah.
take your spot.
Yeah.
Did you like that issue?
So okay, so there are two X-Men books that X books that I've never been big on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I also think is one of the interesting things about Ten of Swords because I'm reading them now, which is New Mutants and Excalibur. And I know
Okay.
some people will be like sacrilege, New Mutants, right? But and not a lot of people will go to bat for Excalibur. I've
Yeah,
noticed.
probably not at this point.
Um, so that was actually interesting and new to me because like my understanding of Ileana was always Peter's sister. She's magic now, like, and because she's Russian, I like assume she was a bit of a hard ass. But to see her kind of go through this sort of Highlander training process with Doug was kind of interesting. And also, I always thought Doug was a neat concept for a character, like him understanding like languages,
Yeah.
but I was never all that invested in him. So to kind of see that also play out, I just read the Giant Size X-Men, which has this really great prisoner reference at the end.
It does.
Yeah, you caught that too, right?
Yeah, I love the prisoner, so that was some good stuff.
Yeah. Um, and so it was really interesting to kind of also see how much mileage Hickman gets out of Doug's powers. So I'm not sold on everything Ten of Swords. Like, like the Resurrection Protocols, I'm still kind of like, okay. I guess that's like a commentary that like on just the nature of the X-Men in general, that they die and come back, die and come back, die and come back.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see.
Oh, I'm just yeah. Please, I'll reach out to you in about a week. Or
Okay. All right.
Choose.
All right.
I'm curious what you think when you get to the second New Mutants issue, the first follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a.
Because I'm looking at this right now, and like the last thing I read, oh man, I might be further back than I thought. Because God, how many weeks has it been? The last thing I read was, oh wow, it was the Excalibur book.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Excalibur. It's the second row. Oh, I'm sorry, no, it was the X-Men book, the second row, the last X-Men book.
Okay.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten to that middle chapter. What's it called?
You haven't gotten to Stasis yet.
I haven't gotten to Stasis yet, right?
Okay. Well, you're in for a rough. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see. Actually,
maybe for a rough road.
Well, so the funny thing is, next week on Friday, we're doing kind of like a talk, like we're doing a conversation about the X books, and so my goal is to get completely caught up by Friday. So, yeah.
Well, you have a lot of people who have some sympathy for you right now, so we'll see.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see. A lot of people. So I messed up. It's Excalibur, so it's in that third row, and it's the fifth one, and it's that at its current state, and I may be crazy, but it's currently running in as my worst comic of the year. So I'm curious.
Oh, really? Wow, man. See,
anyway.
I went into it kind of being like, oh, great, an X-Men crossover already, right? And what I'm getting personally is because I don't read all the X books. I just read the Hickman ones, right? So what I'm getting is kind of like an understanding of all the different dynamics and how they shifted, which is kind of fascinating to me. Because yeah, I've just been reading Giant Size X-Men and X-Men by Jonathan Hickman. I flirted with some of the number ones when they first came out, but I kind of got to the point pretty quickly where I was like, I'm just going to read the Hickman ones. And so, like, yeah, so now I get to kind of be like, oh, okay, Betsy's mad at Brian. That's interesting. And, Sinister's kind of got his own team. That's interesting, and I'm still kind of trying to, I get to see Shuri and Storm like kind of like, have a pissing contest. And I think that's kind of cool. So, yeah.
Well, let's see where it goes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Man, I'll spoil it if I keep going. So I'm just gonna let's go. So you mentioned this, and I think this is an interesting way to lay it out. So it's more the start of the 2000s, but if you look at 97 through 2004, this kind of period of 8 years, the stuff on the screen, these were the top selling books. But
okay, interesting.
So I've been doing this bit, and that's not mine actually. It's Mark Millar has said over and over that comics exist in a 15 to 20 year cycle.
Yep.
And if that is true, and you just play it out, then right about 2002 to 2004 was the start of a new cycle.
Yeah.
And we're at a place where we're in that change now, or right about to be in that change now.
Yeah.
So this era launched. I deliberately put some stuff in from the late 90s in here as well. It's interesting to see like Fathom and Tomb Raider, your top book. Right. That's pretty crazy to think about. 99 was a crazy year where you had the Fantastic Four and Captain America and Avengers there.
Yeah, man.
Before we had like the multi-year X-Men consume run. But what is it you loved about this era? Like what is it that just really always worked for you?
So, I mean, well, okay. I guess I kind of need to explain my history of comics, right? So comics were given to me in the 80s, and I didn't really pay that much attention to them. I think maybe one of the first comics I got was like a Spider-Man, Luke Cage, Storm drug comic or something like that. And I, it's like with anything, like when you're a kid, when someone tells you you should read this, you don't want to read it, right?
Right.
Ninja Turtles came around and that all changed. I was a Ninja Turtle obsessive, and Ninja Turtles quietly became my segue into Marvel, and Marvel quickly became my segue into DC, and then ultimately I just became a comic book fan in general. And then of course because that's of course like in the 90s, and then it all went to crap.
Yeah.
And so after being invested for years, now you're telling me Ben Riley is Spider-Man and Magneto's a good guy again, and he's got his memory erased, and like, it's just there was too much of a sea change all at once. And I'm also kind of, even like as a kid, I always was like a story person more than an art person. Um, and so the emphasis on art kind of also kind of start to bore me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I lost interest, and it wasn't until I want to say about 99 that I started to slowly pick up comics again. Um, and that would probably be around the time of, well, actually, you know what? I'll say it was about two. What does Spider-Man 2 come out? That was 2002.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so I'm way off. All right, so yeah, about 2002 is when I started reading comics again, and at that point, the first things I got were Preacher, Ultimate Spider-Man, The Authority, and there's something else I'm forgetting. But like I remember distinctly, and my years might be a little off here, but I remember distinctly feeling like reading those books and being like, "Whoa, comics have really changed."
Mhm.
Like this is not what I remember. And I kind of picked up Spider-Man just on general principle because that's always been my favorite character, right? Um, but
Yeah.
even that kind of, I know people like to talk smack about Brian Michael Bendis now, but that was kind of a revelatory thing where it's like you got you took that 15-page amazing fantasy story and turned it into like this arc, you know? Um,
True.
and, and like that was kind of like a big deal. It was just sort of like, wow, you get all the nuances of the Parker family, and you kind of get to experience that drama unfold in real time, or like in an expanded view. And then of course there was Preacher, which was like I never read Vertigo prior to that, and so by the time we got to the second arc where Jesse returns to his family. And mind you, I think I was reading in trade. Like I wasn't reading the books as they were coming out because I think Preacher was on its way out by the time I started reading. Um, uh, like again, I was just like, "What is this?" Like I've never read anything like this before. Um, and then there was The Authority, which kind of pretty much was like once I read The Authority, it was like I was all in.
Mhm.
And just this idea that you could make fun of Marvel characters and DC characters in a comic,
Yeah.
um, but also play with this idea of people talk about superheroes being fascists. Here's the funny thing about The Authority: they were fascists. They became
Well,
fascists.
yeah.
Like,
With an actual exploration of that, and it was nice to
yeah,
finally see somebody just tackle it. And I think
right,
Ellis and Millar and others, I mean, we finally got to see what that would look like. And
right,
but if you stack this up, it's just funny to see the Michael Turner and some people in the chat are talking about
yeah,
Fathom, which was always a
mhm,
great time. And then a bunch of, I mean, X-Men was dominating everything.
yeah,
You had the brief return of the heroes after their brief Heroes Were Born
mhm,
segment. Then you had a little bit more X-Men, but then you hit 2001 and you see this shift where
yeah,
the story is carrying these books. I mean, they're great artists. In
mhm,
fact, 2003 we got 2 Jim Lee Batman issues on there,
yeah,
but this was a story-driven era. And it's funny you mentioned Bendis and Ultimate Spider-Man taking a 15-page story and like turn it into an arc. And it was charming back then. I mean,
yeah. It was.
it wasn't decompression everywhere. It was actually something kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, I just kind of like I came back into it and the landscape had changed so aggressively. And so I've been kind of really thinking back on that and looking at all the things that I currently know about that era. And, it's, for Marvel, it starts with Marvel Knights, right?
Yep.
And that sea change that happens because of that. And from that, we get, I don't know where Daredevil by Kevin Smith factors into this because I know I read that around this time too.
It was in this era. I don't have the year off the top of my head, but it's right in that second column.
I'm actually a little surprised it wasn't one of the in their top sellers actually, because I thought it was like one of the bigger books of that time. But now, looking back on it now, I probably wouldn't feel the same way about that particular book. But at the time, the Joe Quesada art, the Kevin Smith dialogue, like it just hit differently, and it kind of seemed like it. And because I've joked about this before, like because comics were no longer under a microscope and because people had just kind of written them off, it really did like free up creators to do interesting and dynamic things. And the irony is like these books, the books that you're featuring here aren't even, a lot of them aren't even the books I liked
Yeah.
from that period. But
Absolutely.
yeah, but at the same time, while these things are coming out, you're getting some really experimental stuff like Grant Morrison's X-Men run. Like, you do have Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon, which seems a little less experimental on the heels of Grant Morrison's run. But at the same time, one of my favorite books, I'm just going to turn around, look at my shelf real quick. So what? You got Planetary coming out around this time.
Yep.
Umbrella Academy, I think, is like later in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's a little bit later.
Right. We have what else we have here? All-Star Superman is also in that pot during that time. What else? JLA Earth 2. I can't forget Grant Morrison's Justice League run, which was also coming out at that time. 100 Bullets. We try to, I think people kind of gloss over Brian Wood now, but DMZ and Northlanders was like a big deal at the time. What else we got here? Yeah, just like so much stuff, man. And like it just, it was interesting to kind of see Marvel willfully handing over their lines to these UK Vertigo guys and just letting them run wild. And I just found that the most compelling era. Someone mentioned Batman Superman. Jeff Loeb had that run where he reintroduced Supergirl at that time with Michael Turner, and it was cool. Even like the early, the New Avengers by Bendis, like that was kind of neat. Like truthfully, to see the team get reshuffled and it to turn into this kind of all-star Avengers team, and they exited the original team.
It absolutely was. I mean, if you look at this era here, and I did a recent video about this around this start of this new kind of moment. You had story driven, but you also had Marvel, and that's kind of the hidden message in here, even with 2003 being, kind of DC centric, and almost all the comics on this list, I think, from the 2001 to 2004 era are all selling over 200,000 copies in a month. But you see the seeds of Marvel's domination over the next decade. They had the Ultimate line there doing really well. You had Bendis on Avengers, you had Whedon over on X-Men, and you had a lot of kind of pieces getting put into play that would basically set them up for the next 10 years.
Right, exactly. And, and then Vertigo was just, and like Vertigo, even without like the guys who really gave them the foundation, without Morrison, without Ellis, without like Garth Ennis, right? Vertigo was really doing some really interesting, wild stuff at that time. Like they actually were kind of in that phase where they could do no wrong, even with books that weren't selling that well. And, I kind of like got the impression that like the attitude at that time was like, well, just try it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, I don't love everything. Like I have a lot of issues with Identity Crisis.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is, as I was putting this together, I'm looking over this. I'm like, some comics I like. Superman is his blue lightning suit, and different things. And I hit that Identity Crisis. It's like, oh yeah, that was that happened in 2004.
Definitely happened. But yeah, it's just comics were free at that point in time. Like they really were allowed to just explore. And it's kind of unfortunate now to kind of see comics kind of like in these bubbles where it's like they're either beholden to internet reactions, right?
Yeah.
Or they're like being gripped by like the potential of becoming some Hollywood thing, right? Or they're in the confines of corporate thing.
Yeah.
And so like you really can't draw outside the lines anymore. And the thing that worries me about this era is because this was such a like wild, wild west period, I see some of these things being kind of slowly erased from history in like weird ways. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's the tragedy, or not me. It's a reason why I think the next big evolution in many ways can't happen or led by Marvel or DC. It's going to have to be led somewhere else.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I think it's going to probably come from the indie side, and from a creator that we probably haven't even heard of yet. Like we look at JLA Avengers, right? And I think for all intents and purposes, like people think fondly of the JLA Avengers book, but that book's out of print.
Right.
And you know what? That book's probably going to stay out of print.
Oh yeah, they're not. That's not coming back at this point.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the year after. I didn't include 2005, but if I had, you see another really significant trend coming out of here,
Mhm.
and that is, other than the number one comic, which is Batman and Robin by Frank Miller, every other book of the top 5 is an event book. You had House of M and
Mhm.
Infinite Crisis kind of taking up the list,
Mhm.
and if you look. Basically, from then on in 2006, and so in 2006, all Civil War.
Mhm.
2007, I think we get into some World War Hulk. No, it's still Civil War. I take it back.
Yeah, right.
Every year after 2005, it's the top. They're all dominated by events.
Yeah.
2008 is the number 1 through 5 book is All Secret Invasion, and
Oh, wow.
that's you don't get another year
Mhm.
since where it's not the events that are leading the comics.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, that's real. Oh, and it's kind of interesting because I saw your Civil War video, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was you and I think it was like one of your Friday night chats actually.
Joe
And,
Corallo.
was that?
Joe Corallo. He's an editor and always great.
And one of the things I kind of like, I was trying to jump into the comments and say was like, Civil War itself is Mark Millar just making fun of everything. Like, I feel like that's really like the big takeaway from it. Like, I don't think it's one of Mark Millar's best books, but I also get the impression that he was hired specifically because his Ultimates is very much satirical in a lot of ways. It's a blockbuster. It comes off as the Michael Bay of comics, right? But at the same time, it's also making fun of the things that make superhero comics function in some ways, right? Like, it's a love letter, but it's also kind of like a diss track, right?
Yep.
And so Civil War kind of does the same thing. So like when you see that they have to bury Goliath in a large a large hole, that's a joke. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yeah.
the fact that the New Warriors, a reality show, New Warriors are doing a reality show and they killed a bunch of people. That's a joke. Like, you know what I mean? Even the depiction of Captain America is, I feel, deliberately, because it's Mark Miller, is deliberately over the top. But the other thing I want to point out about Civil War is, I think, personally, the cool thing about Civil War is what happens in Frontline with Paul Jenkins.
Yeah,
And,
Frontline is great.
and the way that he writes Speedball, that becomes a whole nother animal. That character becomes a whole nother animal during that time. And it's interesting to kind of see that character progress, because then we get into Secret Invasion, right? But Secret Invasion gives us probably one of the best, like, I don't know if you consider it a crossover, but I think one of the most interesting periods of Marvel in recent years, which is the Dark Avengers period, where
Right.
Norman Osborn is on top and all the superheroes are on the bottom. And Ellis's Thunderbolts is a laugh riot. Like, it is absolutely hilarious to me because it's taking the piss out of everything, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see the heroes struggle so much with the bad guys being on top. Matt Fraction's Iron Man, the same thing. Like, it makes sense that Norman Osborn and Iron Man would be opposed to each other. We finally get to see that play out in like a fun like story by Matt Fraction. So, there's just interesting things that kind of like, yeah, you have the overarching big crossover stuff that's kind of there to just like move units, right? And a lot of them are written by Bendis, I think, at that point in time.
Yeah.
But in between all that stuff are some real gems.
There was a lot of, there's some people in the chat are saying there was a lot of experimentation going on, and it was a very interesting era. And I think if you think about in the 15-year cycle, you saw a lot of kind of very bold experimental ideas like the ones up on the screen from kind of 2001, 2004. Then you saw kind of it cement into a business and a little bit of machine.
Yeah.
And that would be the era you just talked about, where we got Civil War, we had Secret Invasion, we had the Dark Avengers, and that whole kind of arc was, great sales for Marvel. They were basically banking on everything that they'd set up. DC came out with the New 52, and despite people's feelings of it, maybe in hindsight, it launched very successfully, and they became the number one company for quite some time. And then now the last 4 to 5 years or so, we're seeing kind of I don't want to be so dramatic as to say the death. I don't mean the death. I just mean the end of this era. And kind of like the last bits of the ideas are kind of cycling around while people are trying to get something new. And if you look at maybe 98, 99, 2000, you see a lot of kind of retread X-Men stories. You see relaunches with Fantastic Four, Captain America Avengers. It very much resembles kind of where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm excited to see what comes next. I really am. I think some really cool things are coming next.
No, I think so too. Like I think it's so easy to kind of take the gloom and doom approach. Like and you know, here's the thing. I guess here's maybe the thing I want to say, right? You have, all right, like I don't want to, like, comic books are kind of split into three sections right now, right? You have one side that I think seeks validation from these corporations and like thinks that they care about what they think about diversity in some real way. You know what I mean? Or social justice in some real way. I have bad news for you guys. They don't. It's a ploy, right?
Oh, sure.
And then the other side, I kind of feel are like kind of selfishly asking comics to, like, you know, truthfully stay in the 90s. Like I kind of feel like that's kind of the big, I think that's the hook for a lot of those arguments. And they're claiming that they care about the future at the same time, which is totally contradictory, right?
Right.
And I think that what we're going to see is there's always a third option that nobody counts on.
Right.
And I think that third option is going to be the thing that's going to spearhead comics into the future.
I agree entirely. I completely agree. I think you've set it up very well. And I do think it's not going to be the kind of doubling down on some of the bets that have been made before.
No.
I don't think it's going to be kind of nostalgic plays to the 90s. Some of those will be good. I'm anxious to see Brett Booth, what he can do. Legends. I'm interested in Chris Claremont right again, always. But generally, I think those two roads are going to be kind of I want to say the dead ends, but it's going to be how the big two kind of focus for a while. Because the reality is, they're owned by giant corporations who are interested in making movies and licensing properties. They're not going to make bold bets.
Mm-hmm.
But that third road, and I think it's the road that you'll see some indies. I mean, it's in a weird, very, very weird way. It's simpler, easier, cheaper to get comics out into the market than it used to be.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Even though they cost more, it's easier, right?
Yeah.
So I'm excited. I think that is going to create a lot of really interesting things for us. And so I think next year will be the collision year. I think next year is going to be a goofy year where there's probably some more layoffs, and Marvel will finally figure out maybe they shouldn't publish 80 books a month or whatever they're doing. And there'll be some kind of downsizing. I think that's going to create a crazy amount of angst in the industry because the industry will contract. That's going to squeeze people out of it. And I think there's going to be a lot of noise and agitation through that. But I think in that process, you're going to see people go, you know what? It's not that hard to actually start something up and work with a small publisher or build something up and get some of these stories out and focus on it, build business. And I think you're going to get some exciting stuff out there. And I think next year will look a lot like maybe on this chart, 2001, where you see kind of a thing. And I'm hoping that 2022 looks a lot like 2002. And we do get whatever our new kind of breed of stuff is. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Absolutely. So yeah, I just say, like, hang tight, guys. Like,
hang tight. Yes.
As I think I saw some people kind of making fun of like a Dan Buckley comment where he said someone asked him about like our comics dying. He says, "I've heard it all before." You know what I mean? And I remember, like, I forget what YouTuber it was, but like they were kind of like making fun of him saying that, like, no, it's gonna die. Like, you're complicit in this just because you're just shrugging it off. But I mean, the reality is, look, we went through it before the Silver Age, right? And I'm gonna say we, right? It happened like, when the DC had that big fallout in the 70s, and it happened again, like, in the late 90s. And in between the cracks is when interesting stuff starts to happen. And
I don't think, what's weird is, and I guess maybe you just have to be older to think about it, running a shop. I mean, I ran a shop during these years of the 90s, and 96 to 99 was not a fun time to have a shop. I mean, I know you're still in the chat. That was not like happy days for anybody.
Right.
And you couldn't go a week without somebody telling you that the entire industry was going to die. And it definitely went through troubles, but it did build back up again. And I think we're in the midst of the troubles, and it will build back up, and some people will do better and some people will do worse. And hopefully we get a lot of new names out of the mix.
Yeah. And I think it's going to happen. Like, all these people, making all this noise online and like trying to get people fired or
Yeah.
you know on both sides. Actually, that's the funny thing about it is like these guys are just like they're dark mirror versions of each other. um
Mm.
like I'm of the belief that these people don't buy comics anyway. To be perfectly honest, like, and you know, it's the look. I'll say it: the Comicsgate side and the anti-Comicsgate side. You know, like I'm one of those people. I don't think Comicsgate is a real thing, and it's not that I don't think people believe it. I just am not convinced of the buying power of both of those sides. You know what I mean?
Well, I
Um,
think they're buying within their segment in many
right,
cases. I think, you know,
right.
the Comicsgate guys are supporting those Comicsgate books, and I think a lot of
Right.
the anti-Comicsgate people are supporting either friends who are working in the industry or their Kickstarters.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting dynamic that gets set up between the two, but in many cases, I mean, I don't know. The extreme arguments of everything is perfect irritate me as much or more as the people who saying everything is going to die. I mean,
Right.
neither of those things are true at the end of the day. So
Hmm. Yeah.
it's, you know, and there are definitely people I think who spend money. It's the people get really wound up in the arguments, and this is where I think both Comicsgate, anti-Comicsgate, both. Um, you know, there's a lot of people who can kind of identify with that, but there's people who are into it every single day, talking about it every single day, and really making a lot of noise. And I think the people who are spending a lot of their life on that
Hmm.
are probably buying less. I mean, for that
Yeah.
matter, like, when do you have the time? And I'm not, by the way, that's not throwing shade at anyone. I'm just saying, you know, it's a bigger world out there than two sides in
Yeah.
many cases. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I look, man, that's what I like about your channel.
yeah,
You know, like I went through that rabbit hole of listening to what everybody had to say from both sides, and I kind of came to the decision that like I don't really feel that strongly about either of those arguments because for me, you know, despite what people will have to say about seeing yourselves in the characters and all the other stuff, for me it's just really about the enjoyment of the book. I don't like, you know, I don't need to see myself in the book. You know what I
yeah,
mean? I
yeah,
don't need to I'm really all about, you know what, Grant Morrison, take me by the hand and let me tell me some weird shit. Like I want to go that way. Like, you know what I mean? That's
yeah.
how I experience these things. And so for people to try to get in the way of that is not interesting to me. It's boring, it's corny, I'll be honest with you. And it's, you know, it has never reflected my experience with entertainment, period.
I'm hopeful that in many ways, the thing I would like best for this entire argument is success, and I would love for the people who are in Comicsgate making those comics for their books to get much more successful. And I say that because if you've got a successful business that's making a lot of money, you're going to focus on that. I mean, eventually, the argument of what the big two is doing is going to be a very irrelevant argument because you're making your own money, you're having your own
Right,
success.
right,
Same
right.
to the other side. You know, I want some of these books. I throw out a name, it always makes people crazy, but like, you get some of these person on the anti-Comicsgate side, get some of your books to be super successful and making a lot of money, and then I have to believe that that success will start to breed just a lot of focus, and then people will build more things, and the argument will get pointless at that point because everybody's just
Yeah.
making. That would be a great outcome. Don't know if that's what we're getting, but that would be a great outcome.
And you know, and I think the argument is getting pointless for a lot of people. I think that I've noticed now that, you know, creators who used to come in hot on these things are starting to distance themselves from all of it.
They are.
Um, you
They're
know, and that's
sure.
probably the wisest thing for them. And then, like, you know, it's not, you know, it's not important that you know, shut up about something you feel strongly about. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that like maybe there's more to this. Maybe it's in the interest of those two sides to have this type of drama.
It
Maybe that helps them
is.
sell books.
I do think there's that dynamic. I don't know that either side would completely admit it, but I do think the argument itself, you know, breeds a lot of the attention.
Yeah,
And that's why I say I hope that the content gets so good that the argument's not needed anymore. That would be great.
yeah, that would be great.
Um, anyway, you want to, so this is, we won't go on to this for very long, but you mentioned continuity.
Mhm.
Continuity has been, when we were setting up this conversation, what do you, this graphic doesn't necessarily mean anything. I do like to poke fun at Dan Didio's insane Excel chart there. Uh,
Uh,
I would love to actually have sat in the room with him when he was doing this table. And if you see on the far left there, you've got this color coding of cells. And I'm sure, you know, gray there is Batman family. I think blue is Superman and red is Wonder Woman.
Let's
And
hope-
Green Lantern green is a gimme, but I would have loved to have like at what point are you trying to decide who purple is? I don't know why that fascinates me. Just what in the world were you thinking there? What do you? So to me, continuity always feels like something people spend a lot of time obsessing about, and it's not that hard of a concept to have reasonable continuity and not make it insane. I don't think
yeah,
that's that hard a task, but people make it really crazy.
yeah. Well, I think it's well, okay. So the DC kind of doing away with continuity thing. I mean, that's the current rumor, right? I don't know if it's been confirmed or not. But I'm okay with that, to be perfectly honest. Like, I think that, look, DC is the home of weird Silver Age Superman, Batman stuff, and gritty, like, Frank Miller Batman stuff, and Grant Morrison trying to fuse all those. I like Grant Morrison, as you can tell. Grant Morrison fusing all those things together at some point in time, and Pirate Batman, and Gotham by Gaslight Batman, and Batman Incorporated. Like, it's continuity isn't DC's thing,
Yeah.
and so I'm kind of okay with that. Continuity is Marvel's thing, to be honest. Like, Marvel kind of introduced that concept to comics, as to superhero comics, I should say. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I've always perceived it that way. And so for DC to focus too much on that is kind of silly to me, especially when I see people talking so much about the animated movies. And for the longest time, those animated movies were like disjointed. They had nothing to do with each other,
Right.
and I think towards the end, they started to congeal a little bit. And so, yeah, I think it's more important that Marvel maintains maybe not even a continuity, because like we just talked about the 2000s, right? And like those Vertigo guys, the UK guys, like the Warren Warren Ellises, the Grant Morrisons, the Mark Millers, they came in from 2000 AD, you know what I mean, and whatnot, and just played. And they would kind of find these pinpoints to tell stories based off of stuff that happened previously, but they weren't latching themselves onto something that happened 30 years ago. And it worked because they were just tell us an adventure with Spider-Man. Just tell an adventure with the X-Men. Like, give us a commentary on superheroes with the Ultimates. Like, you don't need to latch onto those things and constantly re-reference them over and over and over again. You just need to not contradict. Not even not contradict them. You just need to not ignore them, if that makes sense. Like, I don't need editorial to say, well, we're not going to focus on that, or it was what I see some creators say, which is like, it's too hard to focus on that stuff, so I'm not worrying about that. Don't do that. Like, don't say that. Like, just tell your story. Don't worry about Gene DeWolf. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, don't worry about like any of that stuff. Like, just tell that story, because you know what? Eventually, someone's going to come in. They're going to have a banging Gene DeWolf story. You know what I mean? And it'll be part of that. It'll be part of the Spider-Man history too.
Yeah. I think you can have it both ways. It's definitely a topic that people have very strong opinions on. I'll throw some of the things up on the screen while we talk about it. But it is, to me, it always, are we talking about continuity in terms of timeline, everything fitting together? Or are we talking about continuity in terms of consistent characterization? And
yeah, right. Uh-huh.
I mean, I care a lot about the second one. I do like
Yeah.
the characters. I hate, not to go into Ten of Swords, but the I don't know, things that they did with Magic's character and Doug's character in the Excalibur issue that I despised. It is like, hey, 6 issues earlier, these characters were behaving differently. That to me really bugs me, and that to me is where I find continuity. In terms of like, hey, how does all this stuff fit in? I mean, I don't know. I've been in a shop now big parts of my life for the last 25 plus years. And I love the arguments that would take place about where exactly from a timeline perspective, Killing Joke fits with this story, that story. I mean, those are amazingly psychotic conversations. And I think that can be fun. I always feel like that's something that is in many ways better left to the fans to argue about or settle out or have debates on. And when the comic publisher tries to do it, it gets really messy really fast.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think this is the flaw of DC the last couple of years, is they kept getting hung up on Well, how do we make this make sense? Well, let's just reboot everything so we don't have to worry about it. Well, how do we now? How do we make this make sense? Well, let's just reboot everything so we don't worry. Like, clearly, continuity is not DC's thing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just based off of the actual publication history, but even like the last like 10 or so years with the number of reboots with Rebirth and New 52 and 52, it's not their thing. So don't worry about it. And I think you're right. It's important that these characters maintain some level of consistency instead of personality wise, unless there's something in the story that shifts them in that direction. Like, I didn't love the Clone Saga, right?
Right.
But Peter kind of having a like this sort of mental breakdown because he doesn't know who he is anymore. That was kind of interesting when he just webs himself in the corner and like just starts to like get all emo. That part was kind of interesting to me. You know what I mean? Like, that's a character shift that is a response to what's going on in the story, and I'm okay with that. I don't expect Superman to be Truth, Justice, American Way when he's facing the elite, like, you know. But I also expect him to come out at the end of that story, going back to the Superman that he was. You know what I mean? Like, I feel that you can test. Here's what I think the previous generation of writers did really well, that I think maybe a certain amount of the new generation of writers like kind of forget. You break the characters to build them back to where they are.
Yeah.
And I feel like the current, I won't say like right now, but I feel like in the previous years, the attitude was just break the characters. And I don't think that's really necessary. Like, I think that you can look at these characters from a modern lens, and if you get to the point that you can't identify this character through that modern lens, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like the comment that's on the screen right now. I feel like writers coming in, if you're taking a corporate job, you're taking a job playing with somebody else's, you do have a responsibility to adhere to kind of what's going on with that character at the time, the very, very background. I think if you want to make a pitch, dramatically change the character, I think you can do that. And I think you can work with your editor to kind of make that shift. But you should also have the understanding that you're then changing it for everyone else, you know, in the future until it's changed again. And if this bothers you, if you don't want to be chained to those things, then that is where the indies are for you. I think I've had this argument with other writers. It's like, well, I want that Marvel money and I want that job and I want that prestige, but I want to write Thor completely my way.
Right.
Well, then you probably shouldn't get that Marvel money and that prestige. I mean, your own Thor at Image, but I think that's how it kind of, I don't know. At the same time, I do definitely believe that you can get obsessive with this. And I think every time DC's tried to fix their continuity, it's largely been a zoo.
I agree.
I don't know. It's very easy for me to think, this is something that Tom Brevoort, I think, and Jordan White get very obsessed about is, you know, when exactly did the Fantastic Four go into space? And I think the answer is like, who cares? I don't know that I care about that.
It doesn't, no. And I think there's something like, you know, with the Fantastic Four specifically, right? Like, from a historical perspective, that story makes the most sense because it started in the 60s. Like, you know, like the space race was a big thing. And this idea that this guy could just jump into a rocket with his family, unexplained, right? Without explaining to any sort of like governmental body, really. Like, that story makes sense then. So there's no need to recontextualize that for a modern audience. Like, I understand why movies do it, right? But I don't think the comics need to re-explain that. I don't think we need to go back to Peter Parker's origin story over and over again. Like, just tell forward-thinking stories. Just push forward. Like, these characters are strong enough that you can continue forward with them without looking backwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's it's a funny mix to be in. I think it's not all the creators. When it goes wrong, I don't think it's all creators' fault. I do think editorial plays a role there. Mandates about events you're going to have to play in. I mean, it's not an easy job to come in and say, you're now the writer for Iron Man. Give us something brand new, fresh, and wonderful. Also respect everything that's come before. And by the way, in issue 4, you're going to be tying into King of Black, so don't get your story going too crazy. Like that sounds like I'd be drinking more scotch in that.
Right.
I don't know if you see. I'll flip over this. I've done this before. I do this every Friday. I just throw up kind of as we start to wind down, ask some questions of the crowd and answer things. By the way, thank you everybody. We've got 93 odd people in the room.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you everybody who's joining us. And if you'd like to hit like, you can. You don't have to. I don't. I always feel weird asking, but thank you if you did. It's been a great conversation with you, Troy. These comics up here, there's a Twitter account. I'll always plug it to the end of the earth because if you're tired of Twitter drama, here's a nice account. It's called the Spinner Rack, and it does nothing but post covers of comics that came out this week from years past.
Nice.
So, great memories, zero drama. It's great.
I think you retweeted this and I actually started following them. Yeah.
This and like Comic-Con. I mean, there's some sites out there will give you great data, and they just there's no silliness with it. But this week, for Marvel, I only have 2 today. I have one Marvel, one DC. But this is a crazy. Like we got our first issue of X Factor. Like there's some pretty memorable comics that came out this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it's Strong War, and you got the Avengers with this was a Master of Evil storyline. I mean, definitely from years past, but there's some pretty.
That's the Christopher Priest when he was going by Owsley, Spider-Man versus Wolverine, where Spider-Man kills that chick in the graveyard.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And got some Paul Smith X-Men. I don't know. Did he do the interior for that one?
He did.
Okay.
Yeah. This was. I mean, this was pretty amazing. I mean, if you just think about all these issues coming out this time, I mean, it's some crazy comics, and Marvel was really clocking kind of on every front. I mean, it's pretty good stuff. Really, really wonderful stuff. Then over on DC World, I don't have it wasn't as memorable of a week, but still some good stuff over here. This kind of the abandonment at the Teen Titans level. This is always more fun when I have pages and pages of stuff. I only have, like I said, 2 tonight, but it's just fun to look back on some of this stuff. It's some great comics.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. So this is like, this is when Batman kind of low-key scared me because I was probably a little too young to be reading some of these books.
Yeah.
Like DC had leaned pretty hard into the we're not for kids anymore phase, especially with Batman, I think, at this point.
Oh yeah. Batman was definitely doing, and his Rogues Gallery was a lot more kind of intense for younger kids.
Yeah.
It's some great stuff. But it was a fun era of a lot of pretty powerful things, and a lot of kind of cool stuff to hit. Troy, I'm probably starting to wrap up. If there's any other question in the chat, throw them in now. Be great to answer. But I just want to thank you for coming on, being so forthcoming with this stuff.
Yeah.
I hope that people listen, especially to your bits when this is posted up later around kind of Heroes World and that run, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. Not Heroes World. What am I talking about? That's
I'm going to say Heroes World.
Yeah, sorry, I should not inject that into Previews World. I think that's a big mystery for people, and I think they get a lot of their news from either kind of YouTube commentary where people forget about that kind of middle piece, or news sites that I think are often reported very inaccurately of what's actually going on. So it's really good. Yeah, that's a boomer moment. Thank you, Mumbles, there. But I just want to say thank you. I do want to follow up with you after you've read some of those Tim Swords books.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, like, if I haven't burned out myself by doing that the convo that we're going to do on Friday on our channel, I'll definitely have a chat with you about it and see how I feel about everything afterwards.
Please. Yeah, absolutely. This, by the way, the character to the question, this is Kindred, who's the big villain right now for Spider-Man. Here's Troy, what excites you most about comics next year? What are you looking forward to that you're really, really psyched about?
Actually, because we're getting towards the end of the year and I'm starting to slowly kind of compile an article together for Previews World that's just focused on what's the big things to look out for. We do this every year where it's just sort of like, here's some things to be excited about. I'm definitely excited about X-Men Legends because as much as I am currently enjoying Hickman's run, I'm actually in the mood for X-Men again, which is actually something I haven't been in the mood for a while. And so that also means old school X-Men. I've actually been kind of prowling eBay a lot lately, which I shouldn't be doing, looking at older stuff. So it's kind of cool to see the some of these previous generation of writers come back, and also to get Brett Booth on, and he has like a. Sorry, I'm trying not to let my tab die. Um, yeah, like to see Brett Booth and his crew tell some classic X-Men stories. I just saw that Gary Frank and Jeff Johns are doing a solo book, doing a indie book now.
Yes. To this question, yeah, Jeff Johns is not out at DC, but he is doing this book with his Doomsday Clock collaborator over at Image, and it looked pretty incredible. The shots they've shown look great.
Yeah. I mean, Gary Frank. Again, Peter David's Hulk, Gary Frank. That was my jam back in the day. So, yeah, I'm always down for more Gary Frank. People make fun of the way he draws eyes, but whatever.
Gary Frank is a great artist. I think Jeff Johns and Gary Frank are a great team. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing it, and it will definitely be out roughly 2028 and then take 12 years to get done, but it'll be great. I'm joking. I'm joking. No, he's not gone at DC though. He is still doing stuff at Warner Media, and at least for the time being. But it is interesting to see this comic come out there. You got to wonder why they didn't push to have this out with a Black Label book or something outside of DC. I'm surprised, but it's a good get for Image, and it should be probably a pretty strong book.
Yeah. And truthfully, I'm kind of curious what these guys who are kind of getting somewhat shaken off by these big publishers are going to do now. Some of the names that I mentioned earlier are going to have to kind of do indie books again, which I think is kind of interesting. I'm hoping there's some writers that I'm kind of like, you know what, you never finished that thing because you started getting big two work. So yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of like see if I don't know, if some of these writers go back to some of these other books that they kind of like left hanging in the wind.
I agree. There's a lot of loose threads there, and it has been a pattern, especially for the last 10 years, I think, for a lot of creators to kind of set up worlds or start their projects, and then they get noticed, they get to the big two, and then they just leave them abandoned. And if they could go back to some of that, that would be pretty great. It's a lot of people that are heading out. I wanted to throw out, because I put it up a few times, but yes, if you are coming into this at any point in the chat, you've liked listening to Troy, and I don't know why you wouldn't. He's been an awesome guest here, and he is on Previews World Weekly, out every week. So that is a YouTube channel that you can follow. If they allowed me to put links in here, it'd be easy to do. But just Previews World, you could easily find it. The P there is very recognizable, and there's a lot of great content there. Just good stuff to listen to, and it's wonderful. So.
Yeah, we do all sorts of stuff. I mean, previewworld.com is really like our base of operations. I do frequently do interviews with creators. And we also do video interviews with creators as well. I just did a Rick Remender one that I'm actually really proud of. I have a 3-parter I did with Garth Ennis.
Oh, nice.
People have always, every time I bumped into somebody saw it, they're like, how did you get him to talk that much? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no kidding.
I sat down with John Romita Jr. and talked to him about his career, and that was actually really cool. If you're a fan of like some of the manga guys, Adam Warren, he's like an American artist who does a manga style. I've done interviews with him, and we normally always do at least a live. So we always do like some sort of interview thing with the creator every month now that we're in COVID. But we used to do them at conventions, of course. And then we have Previews World Weekly every Wednesday, and it's me and my co-host Ashton who runs Free Comic Book Day. And when I say runs Free Comic Book Day, she doesn't just run the social media; she runs Free Comic Book Day at this point. And we get into comics. We talk about comics. We talk about some of the things you guys are talking about in comics, some of the controversial things. And we also rant about episodes of The Mandalorian, which we'll probably be doing for the next several months, next several weeks. And also we just kind of keep you updated. Like we do weekly videos of like, this is what's coming out from comics, and this is what's coming out on the toy section. And it's just informative, and it's meant to be helpful and fun and just for you to enjoy comics with us. So.
Absolutely. Go check that out. I had subscribed before, but apparently I'm not subscribed now. So thank you for
Oh,
that. YouTube.
cool.
I've subscribed. Great. Always fun when that happens.
Okay.
I don't know what YouTube does with their stuff, but anyway, it is a lot of videos. It's great stuff and it's some good content. Troy, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and for all the people in the chat. Really wonderful talking to you. I hope you have a nice, relaxing weekend. Get yourself a drink if you haven't had one yet. And, yeah, thanks for hanging out with us tonight.
Thanks, Perch, and thanks, guys, for being cool and hanging out with me.
Awesome. Well, have a good night, and as always, thanks for listening.